Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Her Song is a Sin, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lou1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by me, Britt. Her Song is a Sin, Chapter 11. Scylla woke up to the smell of coffee. Her eyes opened and she could see that she was still on Rael's couch, and still wearing her clothes, sans the scarf and jean jacket. She realized that they must have nodded off in the early morning hours. The musician couldn't remember if it was her or Rael that fell asleep first, but obviously, at some point the bodyguard had placed a pillow under her head, and the patchwork quilt around her body. She shifted on the couch and slowly stood up, looking around. The fireplace was blazing again, and the bowls of ice cream had been removed from the table. Only Rael's gun was resting there now in its pancake holster. Scylla turned, the sight of movement catching her eye, and saw Rael walking toward her, a cup of coffee in hand. The blonde was wearing gray sweats and a white t-shirt, and her hair looked like it had recently been washed. "Finally decided to wake up?" Rael asked, teasing the brunette. "What time is it?" Scylla asked. Rael took a sip of the coffee and looked at Scylla. "It's about 11 in the morning. We had a late night." Scylla yawned despite herself. "We did," she managed. "There's an extra toothbrush and comb in the medicine cabinet, and I can get you something to change into if you want to clean up." "That would be wonderful," Scylla said. "I'll make breakfast while you're doing that then." "Breakfast?" Scylla questioned. "Well, brunch," Rael smiled. "Do you like blueberry pancakes?" "Blueberry pancakes sound incredible." Rael nodded. "Okay. I'll leave clothes out for you in my room. It's just across the hall from the bathroom." "Okay," Scylla answered. The musician made her way back down the hall and found that Rael had already put towels and a washcloth out for her. There was an assortment of body washes, bath salts, shampoos, and conditioners, and she found everything that she needed to get clean. Although Rael's couch was comfortable, sleeping on it left her a little stiff-necked, and so she sunk deep into the tub and let the bath salts and hot water work its magic on her sore muscles. When she finished with her bath, she climbed out of the large tub and dried off. She brushed her teeth and searched around a bit until she found a hair tie. Putting her hair back in a simple ponytail, she padded across the hardwood floor and into Rael's bedroom. The brunette saw the clothes complete with underwear and socks on the end of her queen-sized bed immediately, but she left them there and instead moved around the room still in a towel. She looked at the dresser and took note of the various trinkets and pieces of jewelry. In the corner of the room, 2 guitars rested in their stands, and she immediately recognized the one that was like her father's guitar. One bedside table was fairly devoid of decoration besides that of a picture of Rael's family. The other nightstand was strewn with various items, including something that went with a gun, a magazine, Scylla thought it was called, and a book. Despite the warmth of the house, Scylla shivered as she realized she'd spent far too much time being nosy. She moved back to the clothes, a thrill shooting through her at the thought of putting on the blonde's clothing. Rael had picked Scylla out a similar outfit as the one the brunette had seen her in only a little while ago. She dressed and put the wet towel on a hook in the bathroom, and then padded back down the hall. She made her way into the small open kitchen and found the blonde at the stove. Scylla perched herself on a stool at the high-top breakfast nook, tucked into one corner of the small kitchen, and watched as Rael cooked. After a few moments, the blonde turned, a stack of pancakes on a platter. As she caught sight of the brunette wearing her sweats and a t-shirt with the words police in grey against a white background, she swallowed hard. The brunette had decided to forego a bra, and the fabric was tight enough on her chest to make her nipples stand out, depending on how she moved. Hand shaking slightly, she placed a platter of pancakes on the table and moved to the cabinets to get plates and the drawer to get silverware. There, she took a deep breath to calm herself. Once she felt she could speak again, she turned back around and smiled at the brunette. "Help yourself," Rael said as she got a bottle of syrup from the refrigerator. She returned a few moments later, both with the syrup and fresh cup of coffee that she put in front of the brunette. She went back for a glass of milk for herself and then joined the musician at the table. Scylla tucked into the simple meal. She was surprised at how ravenous her appetite was after all the food she'd eaten the night before, but she enjoyed the brunch with gusto and even reached for a second helping of the fluffy pancakes. Rael seemed to be just as hungry, and after a short while, the stack of pancakes had disappeared. As Scylla sat at the table, full and contentedly sipping her coffee, her brow furrowed and she looked at the blonde. "When was the last time you were here?" Rael looked up from her own cup and shrugged. "Just after I accepted the position as your bodyguard? Why?" "The milk," Scylla said. "It's fresh." "Well, yes, I'm not going to give you food poisoning." Scylla shook her head. "And the lobster rolls last night?" Rael laughed and gave the musician a little shrug. "You caught me. You set all of this up?" "Well, it's not as nefarious as you make it sound," Rael said, defending herself. "I have a neighbor that checks on the house for me, and if I call her before I know I'm coming home, she'll stock my fridge. As for the lobster rolls, I've known Mac a long time, and I asked him if he'd stay open a little late so we could eat there." "Oh," Scylla said, a small smile on her lips. It pleased her to know that Rael had wanted everything to be perfect for their date. "Let me help you clean up," she offered. Rael nodded. "All right." Together, they made quick work of the dishes, and after the kitchen was cleaned up, Rael put on another pot of coffee. The domesticity of it all was very surreal for Scylla, and she found that she thoroughly enjoyed the simple action of going about the day. They made their way back to the living room with their coffee, and Rael watched as Scylla continued to explore the space, soaking up as much information as she could about the blonde. There was a trophy wall of sorts with lacrosse trophies and some sort of awards related to marksmanship. Scylla studied everything and asked questions here and there. Eventually, she looked up at the blonde and smiled. "You really are amazing, Rael." The blonde blushed slightly and shrugged. "I'm not so special." "You are. Look at what you do. How many people would risk their lives for someone else?" "Lots of good people," Rael said quietly. "People like my unit. People like my mom." Scylla smiled. "I can understand doing it for your country or protecting someone important, but not for me." "Why not for you?" Rael asked. "You're important. Your life is precious." Scylla blushed and ducked her head. "I haven't been the best example of a good person. I've made a lot of mistakes." "We all make mistakes, Syl. We can choose to let them define us, or we can choose to live in a way where we do the best good that we can do each day." The brunette nodded, and wanting to change the subject, looked at the shadow boxes on the wall. She realized they weren't shadow boxes as much as they were weapon display cases. There were several with wicked-looking blades, and one contained a set of throwing knives. The other boxes were for guns, each one displaying a weapon of various size and age. Some looked like what a pirate might have used. Some would be small enough to stick in a pocket, or as Rael explained, a woman's bosom. One box displayed, according to the plaque inside the case, a .40 caliber Sig Sauer. This box included a paper target that was enclosed behind the pistol. There was a large jagged hole cut out in the center of the target. Scylla could only assume meant something impressive. Rael watched the brunette as she examined everything and said, "Guns don't kill, Syl. People do." "Yeah," Syl answered. "I could show you a little about them if you want. It might make you more comfortable than I'm carrying around you." Scylla furrowed a brow. She didn't like guns at all, and she didn't think she would ever be comfortable around them. She knew she'd be lying to herself if she didn't think Rael with a gun was a little sexy, and the idea of Rael instructing her turned her on more than she'd like to admit. After a moment, Scylla nodded. Sure. Rael got everything that she'd need gathered and walked to her back door, Scylla nervously following behind her. The backyard was huge, and its border was edged by woodland. The brunette could see that Rael already had several boards lined up in what looked like a V-shape, with various distances set up in the backyard. Each board still had a faded outline from where she had sprayed painted targets on them. Within every target, there were several deep cuts into the wood, and she shivered despite herself thinking of the box on display with several sharp throwing knives. Focusing on her targets, she noticed there were multiple bullet holes mostly in the center, creating a tight cluster formation, with some stray holes around the outlined targeted area. Although Scylla tried not to think about it, she knew that Rael was perfectly capable of being deadly if the need ever arose. Rael walked past the table that was set up outside, where she had just laid her bags and weapon accessories down. The blonde mounted a fresh paper target over the wooden board that was in the center of the V, knowing that it would be Scylla's first time shooting, and it was the closest target. She went back to the waist-height table that was set up a few feet from the back porch and started unpacking her bag. Once she had everything lined up the way she wanted it, she beckoned Scylla forward. The brunette approached, cautiously, and Rael offered her an encouraging smile. So first things first, Rael began. Basic gun safety. Rael spoke for several minutes, giving the do's and the absolute do-nots. After a while, she moved on to the basic type of guns, and the commonalities of the parts to the guns. Finally, she gestured to the table again. My day-to-day carry that you see me with is a Glock 19. It's light and easy to conceal. That's what I've got here for you to try. You will see me keep my gun pointed down range towards the targets, or directly to the floor and away from us. No matter how difficult you feel the gun is, never point it toward you or to the sides of you. Before even allowing the brunette to touch anything on the table, she spoke for several more minutes. You'll always treat a gun like it's loaded. I've already checked it. Notice that there's no magazine in the gun and the chamber is clear, therefore it's safe for you to pick it up. She then gestures for Scylla to pick up her weapon. Scylla looked like she was going to pass out, and Rael slid up beside and slightly behind her. She moved her mouth close to brunette and whispered, First step right now, relax and breathe. Scylla's breath caught at the tickle from Rael's lips on her ear, and she nodded slowly. The action did seem to knock Scylla out of her nervousness, though, and she shifted, gaining a more confident stance and allowing her breath to normalize. Rael watched her and smiled when the brunette visibly relaxed in front of her. Good. Now let's go over how to have a proper grip. The blonde demonstrated with her own gun how to grip the weapon, and then helped Scylla place it in her dominant hand. She showed her how to make sure the webbing of her hand was put as high as possible in the backstrap of the pistol, keeping it snug under the tang of the gun. Rael used her hand to guide Scylla's, placing her middle finger under the trigger guard and her thumb forward tight around the grip. For safety, the index finger is always extended alongside the barrel. You should only put your finger on the trigger when you intend to shoot, Rael instructed. She helped Scylla to place her index finger out, the rest letting her finger point to where she wanted to aim. Rael moved her hand, helping Scylla as she closed her grip, wrapping her ring and pinky finger securely under her middle finger. Scylla glanced at the blonde, wondering if she even had a clue how erotic her long, slender fingers felt moving over her hand. Rael's eyes were that beautiful icy blue, and they were completely focused on the task at hand. Given what Scylla was holding in her hand, she supposed that she should be too. After Rael was satisfied that the musician had the right grip, she gave a few more tips, including that the gun should always be aligned with your forearm. Once the brunette had the correct position of the dominant hand, Rael assisted Scylla in moving her non-dominant hand into position. Rael took the brunette's left hand and placed it on the gap that was made by her right hand. Lastly, Rael made a quick adjustment of the thumbs, placing them together and almost parallel with the barrel of the gun. Rael studied her student. Scylla still looked like she felt uncomfortable, but not as scared when she first started, which was a step in the right direction. It looks good, Syl. Just keep breathing. Scylla swallowed and offered a tight smile. As the brunette listened, Raelle continued to guide her, explaining the importance of keeping her hand at a 45-degree angle. Raelle moved on to talking about her stance while shooting, and began with a demonstration of the isosceles stance. As she moved, she explains to Scylla what she was doing and why she was doing it. First, keep your feet just a little more than shoulder width apart, a slight bend at the knees, which will make your butt stick out just a bit. Scylla quirked a brow and bit back a chuckle, but continued to listen as Raelle moved on to how she needed to keep her elbows loose to help absorb the shock of the recoil. See how the arms extended outward forms an isosceles triangle? She demonstrated the stance a few more times and then slipped her arms around Scylla from behind and told her to relax against her as she shifted her body into the position that she wanted Scylla to mimic. Once she was how she wanted her, Raelle let her arms go and gave Scylla the chance to get used to the stance. Raelle put the gun on the table and pointed to various parts. Now these are the parts that help you aim this weapon. Here's your front sight. Raelle tapped what looked like a tiny post located at the front of the gun on top of the barrel. And notice that thing that looks like a blade with a notch in the middle, closest to you? These are your rear sights. Holding the weapon, you will see on the back of the sight you have a tiny dot in the middle of them. Scylla took in the location of the dots on her 3 sights and nodded. Next, Raelle reviewed how to actually fire the gun. Pick up your weapon, spot your target, and aim. Align your sight so that each little dot is side by side. Together, you will see 3 dots in a perfect row at the center of your target. Most people make the mistake of focusing on the target. That's a bad habit. Don't do that. You need to focus on your front sight, this middle dot. This will tell you the relative position of where the gun is to the target. Doing that will give you better accuracy. Raelle instructed her to lift the gun again. Now, when you pull it up to aim, you want those 3 sights to be in a line. That means it's level. They practiced aiming for a few minutes. Just when Scylla had decided she didn't have to worry about the gun because she'd never get around to firing one, Raelle told her it was time to actually load it. Scylla complied, and with her non-shooting hand took one of the many magazines already preloaded and slid it into the magazine well and slapped it in place. Scylla thought that would be fine after hearing about the recoil and that it wouldn't surprise her, but it was still a shock after that first round went off in her hands. She had to make herself hold on to the weapon and not drop it in surprise. She also wondered where the shot went because there was no mark on the target. Raelle helped Scylla adjust her grip so that she was better prepared. They practiced for a while, loading magazine after magazine. There were a couple of misfires, but Raelle taught her to slap, rack, and shoot. By the second misfire, Scylla remembered and completed the task without Raelle's prompt. Scylla was a surprisingly good shot, and Raelle felt that with a few more lessons, she would be comfortable with the brunette having a gun if she wanted one. Scylla had relaxed considerably, enjoying the blonde's instruction and finding that she wasn't so nervous now that she understood how everything worked. She still felt hyper-vigilant about gun safety, and Raelle told her that she should be. Never take a chance. Keep weapons downrange. Always check. Always make sure the gun is clear. With the last round fired off, Scylla ejected her magazine and cleared her weapon before her instructor walked in front of her to provide a fresh target. Raelle had just started to move downrange to replace the paper target for a second time, when a huge boom made both of them jump, and Scylla let out a scream as the heavens opened and the rain came down. It wasn't a sprinkle or even a steady rain. Instead, it was as if a fire hose had been turned on above them, and they were both instantly soaked, even in the few feet it took for them to get back to the porch. Scylla realized she still had the gun in her hand and almost dropped it. Some of her earlier fear about firearms returning, but managed to put it down safely on a table on the porch. She turned to Raelle but saw that the blonde had went back out in the torrent to collect the rest of the weapons and magazines. She laughed at the blonde, watching as Raelle became hopelessly drenched by the downpour. Together, they carried everything back in the house, and Raelle moved the guns and paraphernalia to the kitchen counter, where she set everything out on a towel to dry. After she was done, She moved a little down the counter. She turned to Scylla, a laugh on her lips at the ludicrousness of the situation, but the smile died when the brunette surged forward, pressing Rael's back into the counter. She kissed the blonde hard, her tongue demanding entrance to the blonde's hot mouth, even as her hands began roaming over Rael's shirt, squeezing one nipple hardened by the cold rain and then the other. She pulled her mouth away from Rael's lips even as the blonde leaned forward trying to capture them again, and ran her velvet tongue up the blonde's neck, licking at the rain she found there, still clinging to the blonde's neck in droplets, and nipped at Rael's ear. Rael shuddered, the cold of the rain on her skin mixing with the heat of the brunette's tongue. Her tongue was like a flame licking at her neck, and with a groan she pressed forward, putting her arms around the brunette, and flipped their positions. Rael kissed Scylla, her own tongue seeking out the sweetness of the musician's mouth. She trailed kisses all along the brunette's jaw and dipped her head, letting her tongue swirl at the hollow in the musician's neck. Without warning, she plunged her hand into the brunette's sweatpants and pushed them into her underwear. She moaned at the slick wetness she found there and plunged 2 fingers inside of her. She felt the brunette's walls clench around her, and Scylla let out a gasp as Rael began thrusting her fingers, moving them in and out of the musician, fingers curling inside her. She moved her mouth back to Scylla's throat, kissing and nipping at the skin she found there. Scylla shuddered at the blonde's touch and was thankful for her strong bodyguard and the counter supporting her. As her pleasure built, she moved her hand to the blonde's wet hair, tugging her head from her neck and back to her mouth. She kissed her, the blonde's lips swallowing Scylla's gasps of pleasure. As the gasps increased, so did too Rael's bruising pace. Sensing Scylla was close, she brushed her thumb over the musician's clit, and was rewarded with a loud moan. Rael continued, her thumb pressing against her clit, until at last the brunette tensed in her arms and came with a shuddering cry against the bodyguard, dropping her head on the blonde's shoulder. Rael waited until Scylla's aftershock subsided, and then slowly pulled her fingers out. Scylla slumped against the counter, breath coming in pants, and looked up at the blonde, her pupils blown. "Bedroom," she managed between shuddering breaths. Scylla wasn't quite sure how they managed to make it to the bedroom. There were several stops along the way as each sought to kiss the other as their clothes were removed and skin was revealed. Somehow, they did make it, though, and Scylla pressed Rael the last few feet toward the bed, pushing the blonde down and laying on top of her, coming to rest between Rael's legs. The musician kissed the blonde on the mouth and began a journey downward, alternately kissing, licking, and nipping at the blonde's skin. Rael shuddered beneath the brunette, one hand in her hair, the other grasping at the bedspread as Scylla finally kissed her where she needed her most. Scylla's mouth watered, deeply breathing in the blonde's scent. She dipped her mouth, tongue gliding through her already sleek folds. Rael moaned, her fingers twisting almost painfully in the brunette's hair, pressing her head forward, and Scylla responded, giving the blonde what she needed as her tongue licked at Rael's entrance. The blonde bucked under her, and Scylla moved her talented mouth to the blonde's clit, sucking and licking as she slid 2 fingers inside her bodyguard. Rael cried out, arching upward and moving to meet Scylla's movements. She was already so turned on and so close to the edge by the time the brunette's tongue made a final deft stroke over the blonde's clit. Rael came crying out loudly as her walls clenched down over and over around the musician's fingers. Scylla continued licking, riding out Rael's orgasm until the blonde sagged against the bed, her body still shuddering and twitching. Scylla removed her fingers and made her way back to the blonde's side, collapsing beside her. They lay like that for a few minutes, and then Rael shifted, moving over to brunette. As she made her way down the length of the musician's body, she smirked. "My turn." They continued like that over and over until exhaustion finally won out, and the musician shifted into Rael's arms, her head resting on the blonde's chest as Rael wrapped her arms possessively around the brunette. Scylla had been right about her earlier suspicions. What she'd experienced with Rael was nothing like she'd ever known before. It wasn't quite sex, but it wasn't quite making love either, though Scylla would have to admit to herself she'd never done the latter. She felt like it could become love, though. and that filled her heart with a hope she'd never felt before. I've never felt so safe before. Nothing could harm me with you around. No one could get by you, Scylla murmured softly. Raelle groaned. The aftershocks of their last coupling still made her spasm. Right now, it might not be too difficult, she admitted. Gingerly, she brushed her fingers through Scylla's hair and breathed in her scent. She realized she'd never want to let this woman go, and that she would easily hold her in her arms forever. Raelle would die in a second if it meant keeping the brunette safe from those who would dare to harm her. At some point, Raelle regained enough of her strength and managed to move to throw a blanket on the end of the bed over them, and together they slept. Hunger is what eventually drove them out of bed, when Raelle's stomach growled loudly, disturbing their bliss. Scylla laughed at the sound and propped herself up on her side. She turned to look at the blonde. "Work up an appetite?" Raelle smiled at Scylla. "It's entirely your fault." "I do recall telling you that I could be naughty," Scylla teased. Raelle moaned as she reached for the brunette. "Show me again?" She had just moved on top of the musician, her lips kissing a path down her chest, her mouth closing around a nipple, when Scylla moaned, and at the same time Raelle's stomach growled again. Scylla pushed her bodyguard away, laughing. "I think we better recharge." Raelle let out a dramatic sigh. "If we must. But I don't want to leave this house. I need you close to my bed." "Is there any place nearby that delivers?" Raelle nodded. "Yeah, there's a couple of pizza places, and a really good Chinese restaurant." I could go for some chicken chow mein," Scylla admitted. "Okay," Raelle said, and rolled herself out of bed. She looked around for a moment, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What's wrong?" Scylla asked. "I don't remember where I put my phone." Scylla cocked her head to one side, and then got up from her side of the bed. "I don't remember what I did with mine either." They retraced their steps and eventually found their phones on a table in the front entryway of the house. They each picked up their phones, ready to check back in with the world and order dinner. When Scylla could hear the blonde ordering enough food to feed a small army, Scylla scrolled through the missed messages and texts that she had received. There were a couple of messages from friends, and a slew of texts from Garrett, each one getting more insistent on her returning to the mansion for an interview. A message from Byron asked if she was safe and having fun, and at last there was an invitation to a film festival premiere from an old friend. Scylla took it all in, and then looked up at her bodyguard. Raelle was giving her an almost shy smile as she patiently waited on her. With flourish, Scylla turned her phone off and reached for her bodyguard. "Why don't you start another fire?" Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.